Psychopaths and sociopaths are generally thought of as devoid of empathy and many other human emotions, and they are therefore often seen or felt as alien by the more perceptive people among us. Alarm bells go off that set the person on edge, kicking in the flight or fight instinct for no apparent reason. The following stories could very well be encounters with psychopaths and their kind. Or might some of these encounters be with something non-human, something of pure evil, hunting the weak and the unwary within our societies? An unreasonable fear. One of my hobbies is running, and one day I went for one of my nightly runs. I was at my city's park when all of a sudden I felt uneasy, and with a feeling of impending doom. I looked to my left, and a woman was sitting on one of the park benches, staring at me. She wasn't dressed weird or anything like that. Physically, she was just a normal woman in her 30s, but the instant I looked at her, my instincts kicked in, and my whole body screamed at me, "Get away!" She was dressed in a shirt and jeans with a purse. Her hair was medium length and dirty blonde, completely normal. To this day, I have no clue about what happened. Intuitions of evil. My wife and I encountered a seemingly normal hiker while walking down Bar Trail in Colorado at dusk. Nothing visual about him was off, but both of us got an extremely strong, dangerous vibe off him as we passed him on the trail. It was a strong enough vibe that we both started running, and I pulled my pistol out of my pack just in case I needed to defend us. For a little frame of reference, I retired from the most dangerous federal prison in the US and never got as bad a vibe from an inmate as I did this hiker. The creep on the trail. One day my friend Mara and I were on a popular hiking trail in my hometown. It was starting to turn to dusk, but there were still plenty of other people on the trail. As we started to get close to the trail head, we saw this man with his back to us, just staring off in the direction of the city. Not that that's weird, a lot of people like the view. But dude, the feeling coming off this guy was creepy enough that I let out this kind of weird little yip, like a mini gasp, and we both just knew not to look at him. We hoofed it as quickly as we could past him. After we got about 10 feet away, I turned to look and saw he was either talking to himself or maybe singing something under his breath. It was super weird, but the feeling coming off him was just, ooh. A woman's request. The experience I'm going to share with you is real. This happened to me some weeks ago. On this day, I decided to ride my bicycle into town for exercise and to check out some stores for summer clothing. I stopped at a local clothing store not far from my house. As always, I chained my bicycle to a tree and went inside the store. I looked around for a few minutes before buying a shirt that I liked. Then I walked back out to my bike to go home. My new shirt was in a plastic bag, so I tied the bag to one of my bike handles and then proceeded to unchain my bike from the tree. As I'm unchaining my bike, I noticed that someone in a red SUV is headed straight in my direction. I pay it no mind because I'm right next to a parking lot. The person driving the SUV then stops adjacent to me a few feet away. I look over and I see this woman who begins to look at me with a smile. When I first looked at the woman, I thought that maybe she was someone I knew from the past because she just kept staring at me. But I didn't recognize her face at all. Now that I think back on it, her face disturbed me in some way. I don't know how to explain it, but this woman's face had a haunting quality to it, like looking at an antique portrait. After a few seconds had passed, the woman spoke to me. "Can you do me a favor?" she said. Being courteous, I walked over to her car. At that time, I thought maybe she was from out of town and just wanted directions. When I walked over to her car, I widened my eyes as if to say, "Repeat the question, please." Again, the woman said, "Can you do me a favor?" At this time, I don't know what came over me, but I began to become terrified, and I don't scare easily. I don't know why, but I just wanted to run away at that point. The woman's presence began to scare me. I looked at her, and in response to her question, I mumbled in fear, "It depends." I don't think she could hear me because she then asked me if I spoke English. I nodded my head as if to say yes. And then she told me, "Okay, I'm going to park and I want you to come over to me and help me out with something." I then observed the woman drive her car to the nearest parking lot. Suddenly something inside of me said, "Get the hell out of here." So I ran to my bike, unchained it, and took off. I was so scared that I took off in the wrong direction. As I was leaving, I could hear the woman screaming at me. Her scream scared me even more, and I just started to pedal as fast as I could, and I didn't look back. I got away safely. I remember in that moment, even though I was several hundred feet away, I just wanted to go into a building and hide, because something inside of me said that I was in great danger. There is no doubt in my mind that this woman was trying to harm me, and I think it was my higher self that saved me. I know it sounds crazy, but I personally think that she was trying to kidnap me. For what reason, I do not know. As I think back on that situation, I can't forget this woman's eyes. Her eyes were innocent, childlike, but something was severely demonic about them. I also remember these red circles she had around her eyes. These red circles were very apparent because of her very pale skin. The scariest thing about her appearance is that she looked so young and innocent, yet so evil. There is no doubt in my mind that I encountered something demonic that day. Occasionally, and almost supernaturally, through something like psychometry, a person receives an impression of another's character and intent through physical contact alone, accidentally bumping into or brushing by another person. 1,000,000 pounds of filth. When I was in 10th grade, I was walking through the mall with some friends, and I brushed by a man. I can't describe him to this day, but I know our arms touched as I walked by. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, I felt like 1,000,000 pounds of evil, hatred, filth. I can't even begin to describe it well. Came down on me. It was so bad, I ralphed into a trash can. I was stone cold sober, and I don't do any kind of drugs. I knew that the person I'd touched was the source of all that bad feeling, but to this day, I don't know why. I just know that I stayed physically ill for a good 3 or 4 hours, just from the bad vibe. A glance filled with dread. One time I was walking through the convenience store to grab a couple of things, and this guy who appeared to be in his early 20s was walking past me. Looked like a normal guy, but as soon as I saw him, I got really bad feelings. He locked eyes with me, and I felt absolutely sick to my stomach and filled with dread. My brain told me to get away and run, but I couldn't get my legs to work. They felt weak and limp like noodles. So I fell down twice and made a fool of myself just trying to get away. For some reason, bright blue eyes are mentioned often when describing encounters with otherworldly people among us. Usually these reports describe people who just don't quite fit in, making the witnesses believe that they may be some sort of alien, something like the so-called Nordic aliens. These odd strangers are generally not seen as a threat. However, this is not always the case. The Vagrant. I used to work overnights at a remote truck stop. Creepiness ensued there on a weekly basis. Most of it was just the mundane crackles and pops of an old building. However, there was one night that really stood out in my mind. I was working around 2 a.m, like on a Monday or a Tuesday. I mention this so you understand that it wasn't the normal drunken beer run nights from the kiddos. This vagrant walks in, wearing various shades of a purple tracksuit, the kind that had the triangle patterns, and each block had a different shade. He had a bright green stocking cap on and a backpack. Looked like some sort of a traveller. He had medium-length white-grey hair sticking out from underneath it, and a 4-day beard. Everything about him was completely disheveled and dirty. He grabbed a cup of coffee and paid me, but there was something odd about his demeanour, something I just couldn't put my finger on, almost like a casualness of movement. His movements seemed overly smooth, almost serpentine in nature, and just a little too fluid for your average person. He chatted with me for several minutes as he drank his coffee, and then started to head out. I, of course, gave the usual salutation of, "Have a great night," and when he looked back at me, he smiled, with ice blue eyes that seemed wrong somehow, and had, I ain't kidding, perfect white teeth. Not a stain, not a chip, perfectly shaped and brilliantly white. It chilled me to the bone. I mean, he smiled several times while we were talking, but he never opened his lips. It was literally like everything else, his dress, his hair, his cap, and beard, and the dirt and the unkemptness of it all, was an act. And when he smiled at me, he couldn't keep the subterfuge anymore. It's like I actually saw him for the first time, and he let me. He wanted me to see it right before he left, just to screw with my head. She stared with evil blue eyes. I was driving back from a week-long vacation in New England with my family over the summer when we got hungry. So at the nearest exit, we swiftly got off the highway and found ourselves outside of a Burger King. My little brother and I clambered over the blankets and bags as our parents climbed out of the Honda Civic and stretched. We walked into the restaurant and got in a very long line. The entire time we were in the line, I had a very weird feeling. Once we had placed our order, my little brother ran to get us seats, and my mum and dad and I followed him. Something in my chest dropped. I didn't understand what was happening or about to happen, but I knew something was very wrong. We sat down, and momentarily that feeling went away. But as I glanced up from my chicken sandwich, I saw an old woman staring at me. There was that feeling again, and the way she was staring at me made me feel as if she was a predator, and I, a 15-year-old, was her prey. Her beady blue eyes were piercing, and every red flashing light in my brain went off immediately. Just thinking about it now sends chills down my spine and tears to my eyes. I tried to look away and focus on eating, but every time I glanced at her again, there she was, staring at me. Now I'm a dude, but I look pretty androgynous and I was born female, so I'm very used to people looking at me trying to figure out my gender. However, this woman's stare was almost malicious and still deeply disturbs me to this day. I finished eating and I realized I had to go to the bathroom. My parents and brother went out to the car to wait, and I walked into the bathroom. I was trying to hurry up as I was still in the closet about being a guy and felt deeply uncomfortable being in the women's bathroom. I walked out of the stall and I'm beginning to wash my hands when I get that feeling again. I look up in the mirror and there the woman is, staring at me. I almost passed out on the spot. At this point, I'm so frightened, I can't think straight. I feel sick to my stomach, and I start panicking. She is standing in a way that blocks the door. I panic, and I grab the door handle, forcing her to move her body. She makes a movement as if she's about to grab my arm, but I throw open the door and literally sprint out of the Burger King and into my car. I buckled my seatbelt as fast as I could after briefly explaining what happened to my parents. We got the hell out of that parking lot, and I never saw her again. An electric jolt of fear. During my first couple of years as a writer at Saturday Night Live, my office mate and I, we do an all-nighter. Then we go eat breakfast. It's still dark. I remember there being that crazy New York feeling of Saturday night, something being slightly untethered. We sat at a booth. There were some strange ducks at the diner that night. This gentleman walked past us. He was just this real dark, empty presence. We were both kind of quiet, but we were speaking a little bit. A couple of minutes later, I see him come out of the bathroom, and he looked over at me, and he had crazy pale blue eyes. He reminded me of like a creature, and he just did the most sick smile. It was cold, and he just felt dead. I had a very specific shiver. It was violent, and it made me sick, and I kind of leaned over to Laurie, and I said, "It sounds weird, but when I hooked into this guy's eyes, my whole body just shivered really violently." And she goes, "Oh my God," and throws $20 too much onto the table, and she says, "We're going. Go. Now, now, now." And I chased her. We ran probably 3 blocks down the street, and she turned around to me and she said, "When he looked at me from the other way, I had the exact same shiver. To this day, I still see his face." I guess the moral of these stories is to always trust your instincts. If it feels wrong, flee the scene. I hope you all enjoyed these tales of evil, and remember to always stay alert and trust your gut.